quiet street. The street was quiet in the way only Sunday mornings could be, a hushed reverence clinging to the air. Maya walked slowly, the worn leather of her notebook warm against her palm. Sunlight, still pale and hesitant, filtered through the budding leaves of the sycamore trees lining the sidewalk, dappling the pavement in shifting patterns of light and shadow. She made a note of it. Light fractured, like a promise broken. It sounded dramatic, even to her, but it captured the feeling churning in her gut. She observed everything. The way Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning roses were just beginning to unfurl, their petals the color of a bruised sunset, the chipped paint on the porch swing of the Victorian house at the corner, the discarded newspaper clinging forlornly to a wrought iron fence. Each detail a potential clue, a piece of the puzzle she was trying to assemble. Her thoughts were a tangled mess, a jumble of case files, witness testimonies, and nagging doubts. The latest assignment was particularly thorny, a labyrinth of conflicting evidence and unreliable narrators. She scribbled another line in her notebook, a question mark followed by a single word, motive. A low rumble broke the morning stillness. Maya barely registered it at first, her mind still lost in the intricacies of the investigation. But the sound grew louder, closer, until it resolved itself into the unmistakable growl of an engine. A police cruiser, black and imposing, materialized at the end of the street. It moved with deliberate slowness, its presence a discordant note in the otherwise peaceful scene. Maya paid it no mind, continuing her walk, her gaze fixed on the cracked sidewalk ahead. She'd learned long ago to become invisible, to blend into the background, a shadow in the urban landscape. It was a necessary skill, a form of self-preservation. The cruiser slowed, then stopped. Directly beside her, Officer Derek Miller leaned out of the open window, his expression a mask of barely concealed contempt. His eyes, cold and assessing, raked over her, lingering on her dark skin, her loose-fitting clothes, the way her braids cascaded down her back. "Morning," he drawled, the word laced with a sneer. It wasn't a greeting, it was a challenge. Maya stopped walking, her hand tightening around her notebook. She met his gaze, her expression neutral, betraying none of the apprehension that coiled in her stomach. She knew this dance, this subtle power play. She'd seen it before. "Officer," she replied, her voice calm and even. He didn't respond, simply stared at her, his silence thick with unspoken accusations. The air crackled with tension, a silent battle waged in the space between them. "What are you doing here?" he asked finally, his voice hard. "Walking," Maya said, her tone unwavering. "Enjoying the morning." He chuckled, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Walking? In this neighborhood? Don't see too many folks like you around here, just walking for enjoyment." He let the words hang in the air, heavy with implication. "Is there a problem, officer?" Maya asked, her eyes narrowed slightly. "Maybe," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Depends. What's in the notebook?" "Notes," she replied, refusing to elaborate. He leaned closer, his face inches from hers, the scent of cheap cologne and stale coffee assaulting her nostrils. "Notes on what?" "That's not your concern," Maya said, her voice barely a whisper, but firm. His jaw tightened. "Everything in this precinct is my concern. Now, let me see the notebook." Maya stood her ground, her eyes locked on his. The sunlight seemed to dim, the quiet street suddenly charged with a dangerous energy. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that this encounter was far from over. This quiet street was about to become anything but escalation. The precinct's overheads hummed, a discordant drone to the forced composure Maya struggled to maintain. Derek Miller leaned in, the polished surface of his badge catching the sterile light. "So, Miss Johnson," he drawled, the courtesy a thinly veiled sneer. "Let's revisit this. You were simply meandering through that neighborhood at this ungodly hour." Maya's mouth was parched. She swallowed with difficulty. "I told you, it was a shortcut to my aunt's on Elm Street." A harsh snort was his reply. "Elm Street, you say? A woman like yourself just stumbles into that, that particular locale? At night, he let the question fester in the cramped space. The air seemed to congeal, a suffocating weight on her diaphragm. I'm a resident of this city, officer, Maya asserted, her voice betraying a tremor. My right to be there is no less than anyone else's. The flat of his hand cracked against the table, making her flinch. Don't get cute with me. We discovered you bleeding, prone on the sidewalk, a bullet lodged in your shoulder. And the best you can offer is some fabricated tale about a shortcut? The memory flared, the white-hot agony, the coppery taste of blood. She instinctively touched the spot, a ghostly ache reminding her of the trauma. It's the truth. I couldn't identify the shooter. It was all a blur. His gaze sharpened, pinning her in place. A blur, you say? Or were you too preoccupied, stirring up trouble? Perhaps you initiated the altercation. The accusation was a stinging blow. That's absurd. I'm the one who was shot. I'm the injured party here. He invaded her personal space, his breath stale and unpleasant. Injured party? Or active participant? Maybe you were dealing or looking to score. That area is notorious, like a tracks like. The sentence hung unfinished, pregnant with unspoken prejudice. Maya's fist clenched. I'm an educator, she stated, her tone precise. I hold a master's degree. I volunteer at the community center. I've never been involved in anything remotely like that. Derek's lips curled into a cruel smirk. Sure, that's the universal refrain. And I'm certain those associates of yours will corroborate your story, right? He waved a dismissive hand. You people tend to close ranks. The blatant bigotry landed like a body blow. Maya gasped for air, crushed by the burden of his assumptions. Her pulse throbbed in her temples. What people? What exactly are you implying? He ignored her plea. We found absolutely nothing on your person. No identification, no cellular device, nothing. Remarkably convenient, wouldn't you agree? As if you desired to vanish. I was robbed, Maya exclaimed, her voice cracking with desperation. My purse was stolen. Everything was in it. He emitted a mirthless chuckle, a sound that chilled her to the bone. Robbed? Or concealing your actions? Perhaps you were the perpetrator, doing the robbing yourself. He rose, a looming figure. Suffice it to say, I'm struggling to accept a single word you've uttered, Miss Johnson. Severely struggling. He moved behind her, his footfalls heavy on the worn floor. The cloying scent of cheap aftershave and perspiration filled the air. The room felt ever smaller, the walls pressing inward. Maya's heart hammered against her sternum, a frantic rhythm in the oppressive quiet. She was trapped, cornered, utterly isolated. The buzzing of the fluorescent tubes intensified, escalating into a shrill keening that echoed the escalating panic within her. The shot. The fluorescent tubes overhead buzzed, a grating counterpoint to the pounding behind Maya's eyes. Derek was relentless. His questions, each a barbed accusation, came one after another. So, Ms. Johnson, you expect us to swallow that you were merely passing through at this hour? In that neighborhood? Her ribs protested with every shallow breath, a fiery reminder of twisted metal and shattered glass. I told you, officer, I was lost. The GPS went haywire. A derisive snort escaped Derek as he shoved back his chair. The legs screeched against the floor, amplifying the tension. Lost? In your own backyard? Spare me the theatrics. He began to patrol the cramped space, his boots a heavy drumbeat on the worn floor. Maya tracked his movements, searching for a tell in his gaze. It wasn't simple suspicion. A harder, I see your emotion lurked beneath. I have nothing to hide, she managed, her voice a raw whisper. I'm cooperating fully. I've answered everything. Have you really? He halted his pacing, looming over the table. Or have you been tap dancing around the truth? Perhaps a clandestine rendezvous? Maybe you were involved in something more than just being disoriented. Maya's frayed patience finally unraveled. Involved in what? What exactly are you insinuating? I'm insinuating you're not the innocent you portray. Derek's hand drifted, almost unconsciously, towards his sidearm. I'm insinuating you're lying through your teeth. Exhausted, injured, and enraged by his blatant distrust, she knew this charade had to end. "Now, I'm a federal agent," she declared, injecting steel into her voice despite the agony lancing through her side. "Undercover. I'm on assignment." Derek erupted in a harsh, clipped laugh. "Sure you are. And I'm next in line for the throne." "I can verify it," Maya retorted, reaching for her purse on the floor. "My credentials are inside." Her fingers met familiar leather. The cold reassurance of her badge holder was a welcome touch. But as she lifted the bag, Derek's features twisted. A seismic shift in the room's atmosphere, a sudden, terrifying pressure. His eyes widened, pupils blown. Maya glimpsed a raw fear, or something far more sinister, flicker within their depths. "Freeze!" he roared, his voice strained with adrenaline. His hand moved with astonishing speed, drawing his weapon. Maya's blood turned to ice. Her hand remained in the bag. "Officer, I'm just—" The words choked in her throat, unable to complete the sentence. Derek's fingers squeezed. The gunshot echoed, a cataclysmic blast that shattered the stifling silence. A white-hot fire bloomed in her chest, radiating outward like poison seeping through her veins. She gasped, her body spasming from the brutal impact. Her bag slipped, scattering its contents. Lipstick and notepad, the dull gleam of her FBI shield on the grimy floor. The room spun. The buzzing lights intensified, morphing into a piercing screech. Derek's face swam before her, a mask of disbelief and something else. Something she couldn't quite define before the darkness consumed her. Maya collapsed, the linoleum cold and unforgiving against her skin. The coppery tang of blood filled her nostrils. Her last sight was Derek, gun still smoking in his trembling grip, his mouth a silent scream. Aftermath. The world swam back into focus in jagged, painful pieces. Maya tasted blood, metallic and thick on her tongue. A burning throb pulsed from her side, each beat a fresh wave of agony. She was on the ground, the gritty asphalt scraping against her cheek. Disoriented, she tried to push herself up, but a searing lance of pain stopped her. "Stay down." Derek's voice was sharp, laced with an edge she hadn't heard before. It wasn't the gruffness of a cop dealing with a suspect. It was something colder, something personal. He stood over her, gun still trained on her prone form. "Derek, what?" Maya gasped, each word a struggle. Her fingers brushed against something cool and smooth. Her badge. It had fallen during the struggle, lying face down, unread. He didn't answer. Instead, he backed away slightly, his eyes darting around as if searching for witnesses. He pulled out his radio, his voice shaking slightly as he spoke. "Officer needs assistance at Elm and Maple. Suspect resisted arrest, brandished a weapon. I was forced to discharge my firearm. One suspect down. Requesting immediate medical assistance and backup." Brandished a weapon? Maya's mind reeled. She hadn't even drawn her own gun. The lie hung heavy in the night air, thicker than the smell of gunpowder. "Derek, you know that's not true," she managed to croak, the words bubbling with blood. He ignored her, his face tight, focused on the radio. "Suspect is black female, approximately 5 feet 8 inches, dark clothing. Proceed with caution. She may still be armed." The blatant prejudice in his description stung almost as much as the bullet wound. It was like he was painting her as a monster, a caricature designed to fuel fear. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Derek holstered his weapon, but kept a wary eye on her, his stance rigid. He didn't offer any aid, didn't try to stop the bleeding. He just watched, his expression unreadable. The first patrol car screeched to a halt, its headlights blinding. 2 officers jumped out, guns drawn, immediately leveling them at Maya. "She's down. She's the suspect," Derek shouted, pointing at her. "She attacked me." The officers cautiously approached, their faces grim. One of them finally noticed the blood pooling beneath her. "Call paramedics now," he barked at the other officer, then knelt beside Maya, his expression softening slightly. "Stay still. Help is on the way." As they worked to stabilize her, Maya felt a wave of despair wash over her. She was an FBI agent sworn to uphold the law, and now she was lying bleeding in the street, falsely accused by a fellow officer. Within minutes, the scene was swarming with police cars, ambulances, and flashing lights. The small intersection was transformed into a chaotic stage. The news spread like wildfire, fueled by social media and word of mouth. Hashtag Elm Street shooting. Hashtag justice for victim. Hashtag police brutality. The hashtags exploded across Twitter and Facebook. A video, shaky and blurred, surfaced online. It was filmed from a nearby apartment window and captured the tail end of the confrontation. The gunshot, Maya falling, Derek standing over her. It didn't show what led up to the shooting, but the image of a black woman lying wounded in the street, surrounded by police, was enough to ignite the powder keg of racial tension that had been simmering in the city for months. Protests began to form almost immediately. People gathered at the police station, chanting slogans, holding signs that read, "Black Lives Matter," and "No justice, no peace." The crowd grew larger and angrier as the night wore on. The mayor issued a statement, promising a full and transparent investigation, but it did little to quell the rising tide of outrage. The city was on the brink. Investigations began. The beeping was relentless, a metallic counterpoint to the throbbing in Maya's shoulder. White. Everything was too white. The starched sheets, the sterile walls, the concerned faces peering down at her. Her mother's face was a roadmap of worry, etched with lines Maya had never noticed before. Liam, her fiancé, held her hand, his grip tight, almost painful. "You're awake," Liam whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Thank God, you're awake." The memory hit her like a physical blow. The sudden flash of headlights, Derek's snarled accusation, the searing pain. Her breath hitched. "Derek," she croaked, the words scratching her throat. "Where is he?" Liam exchanged a look with her mother. A silent conversation passed between them. He's being questioned, baby," her mother said carefully, smoothing her hair. "Internal Affairs is here. And the FBI." The FBI. That meant everything was out in the open. Her cover, her mission, all of it. A wave of nausea washed over her. A knock on the door. A woman in a crisp navy suit entered, her face professional, devoid of warmth. "Internal Affairs. Agent Johnson," she said, her voice flat. "I'm Agent Davies. I need to ask you some questions regarding the events of last night." Before Maya could respond, the door opened again, and Marcus Hayes filled the doorway. Relief flooded her, momentarily eclipsing the pain and the fear. "Agent Davies," Marcus said, his voice firm but respectful. "Agent Johnson is in no condition to be questioned right now. She needs rest." He turned to Maya, his eyes filled with concern. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been shot, Marcus," she managed, a weak smile tugging at her lips. Davies' jaw tightened. "With all due respect, Agent Hayes, this is an ongoing investigation. Agent Johnson's testimony is crucial, and it will be given," Marcus countered, his gaze unwavering. "After she's had time to recover. I'll be here to ensure she cooperates fully." He turned back to Davies. "I'm sure you understand the protocols. Now, if you'll excuse us." He subtly gestured towards the door. Davies hesitated, then, with a curt nod, left the room. The tension in the small space seemed to ease slightly. "Internal Affairs is all over this," Marcus said, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "And the brass is breathing down everyone's necks. They're painting you as difficult, uncooperative. They're saying you escalated the situation. That's bullshit, Marcus, and you know it. Duh. But we need to prove it. I need you to tell me everything, Maya. Everything that happened leading up to that traffic stop." He listened intently as she recounted the events of the past few weeks, the subtle digs, the blatant disregard, the feeling of being constantly watched and judged. She described Derek's increasing hostility, his obsession with her, the way he seemed to relish any opportunity to undermine her authority. "He was waiting for me to mess up, Marcus. He wanted this." "I believe you," Marcus said, his voice low. "And I'm going to prove it. I've already pulled Derek's file. There are some inconsistencies. A couple of complaints about excessive force, dismissed for lack of evidence. A pattern of targeting minority drivers. He paused, his expression grim. I am digging deeper. I'm going to find something. The next few days were a blur of medical examinations, whispered conversations with Marcus, and the gnawing anxiety of knowing her career, her life, hung in the balance. The news reports were relentless, painting a picture of a rogue cop shooting an innocent woman, or even worse, a troubled officer confronting a dangerous, insubordinate agent. One afternoon, Marcus arrived with a weary but determined look in his eyes. I found something, Maya. Something big. Turns out, Derek's father was a cop too. Retired with full honors. But before he retired, he was investigated for, well, let's just say his views on certain demographics weren't exactly progressive. The investigation was quietly dropped. No charges filed. But there's more. Derek's father and the mayor, they're fishing buddies. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. So, Derek had protection. Looks that way. But that protection might not extend to him now. Not with the FBI involved. This could blow the whole thing wide open. He paused, looking intently at her. I also found something else. A series of encrypted emails between Derek and someone unidentified. I've sent them to our tech team. They're working on cracking them now. He reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. We're going to get through this, Maya. I promise you we're going to get him. Unmasking the truth. The internal affairs file on Derek Miller landed on Marcus's desk with a muted thump, a thick brick of accusations outlining the departmental decay. He flipped it open. The sharp, clean scent of new paper did little to mask the bitter aftertaste of injustice. Unjustified detentions, brutality, complaints, accusations of bias, Maya murmured, peering over his shoulder, her nights still haunted by the gunshot's echo and Miller's cruel smirk. A pattern emerged from the documented incidents. Young black men, targeted for trivial offenses or no offense at all. The pretexts were flimsy, the charges inflated, the aggression swift. One case detailed the arrest of a young man, barely past boyhood, charged with loitering while waiting for his bus. The charges evaporated, but the damage lingered. A lost job, a stained reputation, a seed of distrust sown. He was building a case against an entire community, one fabricated offense at a time. Marcus observed, his voice hardening. The day unfolded with a series of interviews, each narrative a disquieting echo of the others. Mrs. Johnson, her voice trembling, recounted how Miller had accosted her grandson for riding his bike on the sidewalk, typically a minor infraction warranting a simple warning. Instead, he'd slammed the boy against the squad car, alleging theft. Petrified, the boy had lost control of his bladder. He looked at my grandson like he was less than dirt, she choked out, tears brimming. Like he wasn't even a person. Mr. Davis spoke of Miller's weeks-long surveillance, the patrol car an ever-present, predatory shadow in his rearview mirror. When he'd finally confronted Miller, demanding an explanation, he received only a smirk and a cryptic warning about associating with the wrong crowd. As twilight painted the precinct in somber hues, Marcus and Maya arrived at the community center. Evelyn Reed had orchestrated a gathering, a sanctuary where people could unburden themselves and find solace in shared grievances. The atmosphere inside was charged with raw sentiment, a volatile mix of indignation, trepidation, and fragile optimism. Evelyn, positioned on a makeshift platform, spoke with unwavering conviction. "We have been muzzled for far too long," she proclaimed, her gaze blazing with righteous anger. "They have tried to invalidate our experiences, to silence our voices. But tonight, we declare that we will no longer be suppressed. We will no longer be ignored." Maya observed Evelyn as she moved through the crowd, extending a comforting touch, an empathetic ear, a word of encouragement. People flocked to her, drawn by her inner strength and profound empathy. Later, Evelyn drew Maya aside, her face creased with worry, yet her eyes still held a flicker of resolve. "This is only the start, Maya," she said quietly. Derek Miller is just one bad seed in a field of corruption. We must continue to fight until we eradicate the whole system." Maya nodded, her spirits subdued, but her determination unwavering. She surveyed the faces in the room, each bearing the marks of injustice. The journey ahead would be arduous and lengthy, but they were united. They had each other, and they had Evelyn Reed, a guiding light in the encroaching darkness. The weight of responsibility settled upon Maya, a significant burden, but one she willingly embraced. The trial. The courtroom air hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from anticipation and dread. Maya sat rigidly in the gallery, her left leg throbbing beneath the tailored wool of her skirt. The bullet wound had healed, a puckered testament to Derek Miller's rage, but the phantom pain lingered, a constant reminder. District Attorney Thompson, a woman with eyes like polished obsidian, rose. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice resonating with steely conviction. "This is not a case of split-second decision-making. This is a case of calculated prejudice." Officer Miller, fueled by ingrained biases, saw not a citizen in need of assistance, but a threat embodied in the color of Maya Johnson's skin. He acted not in service, but in malice, and the evidence will unequivocally prove his guilt. The defense attorney, a man named Harding with a perpetually sweating brow, countered with a nervous cough. "The prosecution paints a picture of a monster," he said, his voice wavering slightly. "But Officer Miller is a dedicated public servant. He acted under extreme duress, responding to what he perceived as an immediate threat. We will demonstrate that Miss Johnson's actions, however misinterpreted, placed Officer Miller in a position where he reasonably believed his life was in danger." The trial began in earnest. Thompson called a series of witnesses, each piece of testimony meticulously building a damning portrait of Derek Miller. His past disciplinary actions, previously dismissed as minor infractions, were now presented as evidence of a pattern of racial profiling and excessive force. Body cam footage, previously sanitized, was enhanced to reveal Miller's aggressive tone and dismissive attitude towards minority citizens during routine stops. The prosecution played the 911 call from Maya, her voice filled with genuine distress, followed by the distorted audio of Miller's arrival, his shouts escalating quickly to violence. Harding tried to discredit the evidence, arguing that the enhanced audio was manipulated and the past complaints were unsubstantiated. But Thompson anticipated every move, presenting irrefutable documentation and expert analysis that chipped away at his arguments like waves eroding a cliff face. Then came Maya's turn. She walked slowly to the stand, the click of her heels echoing in the silent courtroom. She swore to tell the truth, her voice clear and steady, despite the tremors that threatened to betray her composure. Thompson guided her through the events of that night, prompting her to recount the break-in, her desperate plea for help, and the horrifying moment when Miller, instead of offering assistance, pointed his gun and fired. Maya's voice broke slightly as she described the searing pain, the disbelief, and the fear that gripped her as she lay bleeding on the sidewalk. Harding's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned Maya relentlessly, attempting to cast doubt on her motives and portray her as a potential aggressor. He implied that she might have been involved in the break-in herself, a suggestion that drew gasps from the gallery. "Isn't it true, Miss Johnson," Harding pressed, his voice sharp, "that you resisted Officer Miller's commands?" "I was terrified," Maya replied, her voice trembling but firm. "I didn't understand why he was pointing a gun at me. I was trying to explain, but he wouldn't listen." Harding tried to paint her as uncooperative, aggressive, and ultimately deserving of Miller's actions. But Maya held her ground, her eyes fixed on the jury, her voice unwavering as she refuted each accusation. She presented herself as a victim and an honest woman. The defense's case faltered further when they called Officer Reynolds, Miller's partner, to the stand. Reynolds, clearly uncomfortable, hesitated when asked about Miller's behavior. He confirmed that Miller had made several racially charged comments in the past, though he quickly added that he never believed Miller to be a racist. The prosecution rested, leaving the jury with a mountain of evidence that pointed directly to Derek Miller's guilt. Harding's closing argument was a desperate plea for understanding, a plea that fell flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence. The weight of the prosecution's case was crushing. The defense team had failed to create any reasonable doubt. Justice served. The stand felt impossibly high. Maya adjusted the microphone, her fingers still clumsy despite weeks of physical therapy. She swallowed, the dryness in her throat a stark reminder of the fear she'd fought so hard to conquer. Looking out at the jurors, their faces a mix of curiosity and solemnity, she felt a tremor run through her. But then she saw Sarah, her partner, sitting in the front row, a silent anchor of support. Maya drew a breath and began. She spoke clearly, her voice gaining strength as she recounted the events of that night. The stop for a broken taillight, the escalating tension, Derek's hand instinctively reaching for his weapon when he saw her badge. She described the flash of the muzzle, the searing pain, the world tilting sideways as she fell. She didn't flinch from the details, forcing herself to relive the horror, to paint a picture so vivid, so undeniable, that no one could doubt the truth. She recounted Derek's words, his voice dripping with disdain, the racial slurs that had followed her even as she lay bleeding on the asphalt. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with hell breaths. Even Derek, usually so arrogant, sat rigid, his face a mask of carefully constructed indifference. But Maya saw the flicker of fear in his eyes, the barely perceptible tremor in his hands. The defense attorney tried to discredit her, painting her as an aggressive, insubordinate officer. He hammered on the fact that she hadn't immediately identified herself, suggesting she had something to hide. But Maya held her ground, her answers measured and unwavering. She admitted her mistake, explaining the situation, the late hour, her desire to quickly resolve the issue and get home. She emphasized that none of it justified the use of deadly force. The cross-examination stretched on, each question a calculated attempt to undermine her credibility. But Maya refused to break. She had sworn an oath, not just as an FBI agent, but as a human being, to speak the truth. And she would not be silenced. Finally, the questioning ended. Maya stepped down from the stand, her legs shaky but her head held high. She met Sarah's eyes, and a silent understanding passed between them. She had done her part. Now, it was up to the jury. The deliberation felt like an eternity. Days bled into nights as Maya waited, the tension in the city palpable. News reports speculated endlessly, the outcome uncertain. Protests continued, demanding justice, a reminder of the deep racial divide that had been exposed by the case. Then the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with reporters, activists, and concerned citizens. Maya sat beside her lawyer, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel Sarah's hand on her arm, a steadying presence. The foreman stood, his voice solemn. In the matter of the state versus Derek Miller, we the jury find the defendant. He paused, the silence deafening. Guilty. A gasp swept through the courtroom. Maya closed her eyes, a wave of relief washing over her. But it was short-lived. There were more charges. Guilty of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Guilty of attempted murder. Guilty of hate crime. Each word was a hammer blow, striking at the heart of Derek's lies. Guilty. 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 The truth had prevailed. The judge, a stern woman with years of experience, addressed Derek. Her voice was cold and devoid of emotion. Mr. Miller, you have been found guilty on all counts. Your actions were not only a violation of the law, but a betrayal of the public trust. You swore to protect and serve, and instead, you inflicted grievous harm based on prejudice and hate. She paused, her gaze unwavering. This court sentences you to the maximum penalty allowed by law. 25 years for attempted murder, 10 years for aggravated assault, and an additional 20 years for the hate crime to be served consecutively. You will not be eligible for parole. A collective intake of breath filled the room. Derek's face crumpled, his carefully constructed facade finally shattered. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was led away, his shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with a dawning realization of the consequences of his actions. Justice, Maya thought, was finally served. It wouldn't erase the pain, wouldn't heal the scars, but it was a start. A step towards a future where no one would have to suffer the same fate. A new beginning. The ghost of antiseptic clung to Maya, a sterile echo of the hospital. The interrogation room, however, assaulted her with the cloying aroma of stale coffee and raw despair. Detective Miller, exhaustion carved deep trenches in his face, pressed forward. "Ms. Johnson, we know this has been traumatic, but we need to clarify your involvement." Involvement. The word echoed, a constant accusation. Her involvement in surviving a gunshot. Her involvement in the ensuing uproar triggered by Harding's actions. Victim. The word tasted like ash. A truth the system seemed determined to ignore when the victim was black. "I was shot," Maya stated, her voice a dry rasp. "What else is there to clarify?" Miller scrubbed his face, pushing back thinning hair. "We're trying to assemble the pieces. The demonstrations, the unrest. Harding's history. It's layered." Layered? A racist shooting hardly seemed complex. Maya choked back a retort, refusing to offer them the satisfaction of a crack in her composure. "All I know is I woke up to find the world ablaze. And honestly, detective, that fire was long overdue. But fire required direction, control." Evelyn's counsel was a soothing balm on Maya's open wounds. Evelyn, steeped in experience, guided Maya through the storm, a buffer against the ravenous media, a conduit to legal aid. A week later, in the community center, Evelyn sat opposite her, the atmosphere redolent with brewing tea and quiet resolve. "They will attempt to portray you as the spark, Maya," Evelyn warned, her tone a hushed steel. "They will seek to undermine your credibility, to bury your voice. Do not allow it." Maya met Evelyn's gaze, noting the myriad lines fanning from her eyes, each representing a battle weathered, a victory secured. "What do I do?" A faint smile played on Evelyn's lips, a knowing curve. "You wield your voice. You share your truth. You embody the change you envision." And Maya began. She started small, addressing local gatherings, recounting her experience, unvarnished and raw. She spoke of the terror, the agony, the injustice. She spoke of Harding, of the system shielding him, of generations of black lives extinguished by law enforcement. Evelyn mentored her, honed her skills, navigated her through the minefield of public opinion. They collaborated with attorneys, advocates, and community leaders, devising a strategy for police overhaul that transcended superficial adjustments. They pressed for accountability, transparency, and an end to qualified immunity. The press, initially adversarial, began to soften. Maya's narrative possessed an undeniable force, a compelling resonance. She blossomed into a symbol, a beacon for a community long ignored. Then arrived the day she faced a throng of hundreds in the town square. The air pulsed with anticipation. Dread tightened its grip in Maya's gut, but she fought it down. She scanned the faces, a mosaic of black, white, and brown, united in their demand for justice. "I did not seek this," she began, her voice resonant and clear, amplified by the microphone. "I never asked to be a symbol. I simply wanted to live." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "But what befell me," Maya pressed on, "is not simply about my individual experience. It's about our collective reality. It's about the deeply ingrained bigotry that permeates our society, emboldening officers like Harding to operate with impunity." She paused, inhaling deeply. The silence was absolute. "We will no longer be silenced," she proclaimed, her voice ringing with defiance. "We will not succumb to intimidation. We will persevere until justice prevails. We will fight to forge a future free from the fear of the police, where every individual is afforded dignity and respect." The crowd erupted in jubilation, a tidal wave of sound that enveloped Maya, instilling in her a sense of purpose she had never before comprehended. This transcended her own experience. It represented something grander, something profoundly significant. Evelyn watched from the periphery, her gaze brimming with pride. She understood the road ahead would be arduous and fraught with obstacles. But observing Maya, noting the fervent gleam in her eyes, she felt a burgeoning hope, a genuine prospect of enacting change, of ushering in a new dawn.